Welcome to Full Throttle Talk, the podcast where horsepower meets conversation. From supercars to classic legends, high revving tech to motorsport mayhem, we cover it all. Straight from the driver's seat, whether you're a gearhead or racer or just love the thrill of the open road, you're in the right place. Buckle up, hit the gas, and let's go full throttle into today's episode. Welcome back to Full Throttle Talk. We've got a really fun show for you today. We're going to be talking about the latest automotive-related headlines, and then we're going to have a Ferrari-focused show. And so we're going to be talking about vintage Ferraris, new Ferraris. We're going to be talking probably a little bit about the whole way that someone can go about starting to order new Ferraris, all the things. And we're going to just all the things, right? That's really the bottom line. Wherever our minds go that's automotive-related, that's what we're going to talk about. And by the way, if you have any suggestions for show topics, or if you have any ideas, anything like that you think that would be interesting for us to, yammer on about, please feel free to submit your ideas in the comments or just message us directly on Instagram. All right, Paul and Greg, you guys ready to rumble?
Absolutely.
Sure. All right, so I have a question for both of you guys. I like to start every show. So since the last week, what has crossed your radars, automotive related, that really sticks out the most? If there's only one car thing that's at the top of your mind or car adjacent thing, what would it be?
Paul, can you go first?
Yeah, sure. One of my dream cars, I didn't really get to drive it, but I got to move it as my client was shipping the car and I was available. It was a 73 RS Touring in chartreuse. It is one of my all-time favorite colors, lime green chartreuse. It was two different names for it. And back in 2003, I had a chartreuse T that I planned to make into an RS clone. And it was original chartreuse. And the week after I got it, I go to a early S R group kind of breakfast meet, and a guy shows up with a real RS in chartreuse, which I think they made 2 or 3 of. And it just sort of took all the wind out of my sail. I never did it. And then go fast forward 20 years later, and that exact RS is stored at our complex, and I get to drive it, albeit 100 feet.
You know what you do on the next show, if you can show us that car, albeit on probably your mobile phone. I'm sure everyone would love to see it. I'd love to see it, that's for sure. Yeah.
I'll send you guys a video.
Mr. Stanley?
Awesome. Yeah. So whenever I go to one of our auctions, I try to figure out which car am I absolutely in love with. And this happened at Scottsdale. There's a Lancia that was kind of hot rod. It was hot rodded. I don't want to say Singer-esque, but it was really done well. These cars are just gorgeous to begin with, but it had its, V8 in it with Webers on it. It had a chopped roof. It had full leather custom interior. It had billet, pedals, and it was just unbelievable. And I think the estimate was 700 to 900, sold for 650 or so. And when I was at Cavallino, I was telling a friend of mine about that car, and he's a collector. He's like, well, I bought that car. I'm like, oh, seriously? Okay. And he also has the real Ferris Bueller's Day Off fake Ferrari, Modena Ferrari. And so I said, well, now I got 2 cars I want to drive in your collection. He's like, well, just visit. We'll just spend all day driving cars. I'm like, all right, I gotta head to Virginia at some point. So
couldn't you just drive a 1970s or 80s 280ZX and have the same experience as driving that Modena? You could. I'm pretty sure that's
theory, but no.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember that scene in Ferris Bueller where Ferris dresses up as Sloane's dad?
Yeah.
And picks up Ferrari in the big cloak and the hat, So I've threatened to do that with Zoe, with our Ferrari, and she's mortified just the idea of me doing that. That's my constant threat if she acts a little harebrained.
Anyway. Especially with the extended kiss to Sloane. And
that I wouldn't.
I wouldn't do it in Italy.
Exactly.
Yeah. At Bear Jackson, they actually had one of the Modena cars. They called them, I think the company was called Modena, fake Ferrari, Ferris Bueller, and I think they built 20 of them before they were sued by Ferrari. So there's actually 20 real fake ones, and one has a 289. Most of them are Corvette chassis, Corvette powered, but I'd love to have one because you have the beautiful looks and you don't have to worry about beating it up.
Greg, can you actually save that thought? Because I want to talk about all the GTO engineering Ferraris, all the high-end reproduction Ferraris and all the rest of it. Because that's something that's fascinated me. And I spent some time researching it years ago, but let's talk about that on today's show, because that's something that's interesting part of the whole, especially the vintage Ferrari market. So I'm going to share with you guys something that I can't quite get out of my mind that's automotive related. And I think Greg will appreciate it, but I'm pretty sure Paul won't. I can't wrap my mind around the new Corvette ZR1. I don't understand how that car can exist for that money, for 180 grand. I don't get it. I don't get how they can make a car with over 1,000 horsepower that goes 235, miles per hour, that offers all the stuff that car offers. These massive, carbon fiber, and they're not just carbon ceramic. They're not just carbon ceramic. They're the new carbon ceramic brakes you're seeing on like the high end, not a normal production Ferrari, but the F80, things like that. So they're putting all these incredibly expensive, bits and bobs on this car that's 180 grand. I know everyone's going to say it's a Corvette and it's all these other things, but setting that aside and you just look at the product for what it is, and you compare that to something that's twice the money, 3 times the money, this is kind of sort of not really working out in my brain. And people will say, well, every ZR1's been like that before. Not true. They haven't been like that. The other ones have always been, the whole front engine thing, even though they look cool, was definitely kind of compromised versus a mid-engine. Now that it's mid-engine, when they start testing that car on tracks and you start seeing it being tested against $1 million cars, I'm not really sure what that's going to do to the whole supercar, hypercar, expectation, equilibrium sort of, calculus in the world. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? That's the one that blows me away, that when the price came out.
I don't think it's going to change it too much, because the last ZR1 was pretty awesome. Granted, totally different level, but it was as fast as a lot of the high performance stuff. And I think the reason they can do it is you've got fair union wages. I don't know, compare GM workforce and cost of supply and lack of markup to Ferrari, right? I mean, every employee probably gets paid twice as much what a GM employee, at least I would think. I don't know, maybe not. But I got to imagine every single part on that Ferrari is massively marked up by Ferrari. I think that the profit margins. I mean, I would imagine the profit margin on the F80 is just massively higher than, the ZR1. And so you ask, how can they build it that way? I think Ferrari could build it a lot cheaper, but they choose not to. But it's also the cost of supplies, the cost of labor, and all the stuff that goes with it.
A lot of it too is people are willing to pay that much more. It's just the perception of the value of the brand. And
the exclusivity. Yeah.
Yeah. It's with the tariffs that they're talking about charging. I don't know if you guys have been following that with regards to automotive. I don't know if there's going to be any exemptions, but the imported cars could start having tariffs put on them at varying levels, 10%, 20%. So if you thought a new car from, Italy was expensive now, just wait to see if they actually get tariffed. And I've been following that headline, but if that happens, I'm curious from your guys' perspective, if all of a sudden there's a 20% added tax on every new Ferrari, what is that going to do to used values?
I think I have many clients and friends and people who work for some of the major German automotive manufacturers who have explicitly said they are extremely concerned, which in German speak means they're freaking the shit out. Like it is, and I thought they were just kidding about it, but they're really concerned about it because for most of the manufacturers, Mercedes, Audi, the whole Volkswagen group, Porsche, we're their biggest market or one of their biggest markets. So it is a concern. Now, ironically, I think maybe it'll happen what happened with Honda and some of the Japanese manufacturers where Porsches are going to, Mercedes has already assembled some of their products in Alabama, BMWs in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I mean, Porsche in Reno, Nevada again, who knows?
Because, Porsche doesn't make anything here. They have offices here, correct? I don't think they don't make.
No, but I can see them assembling cars here. I mean,
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. And that only makes sense. I mean, so we were in Maranello last August and we went by Lamborghini. And I'll just tell you guys the story because I think it's interesting. When you walk into Lamborghini, so with this, the second or third time we've been at Lamborghini, when you walk into Lamborghini, there's 2 separate lines. And this was, you had the Gallardo, obviously, and then you have the, I'm having brain fog. What's the other one? You guys help me out here.
with the Murcielago or the
No, no,
old
no,
one?
no, no. We have the Aventador and we have the Gallardo. So that was, I'll just stick with that story. That was the first time we were there, back when they were making Gallardos and they were making Aventadors. So the lesser expensive V10 car was assembled, and you could literally see the boxes where the parts were, like the Sparco seat boxes were sitting right off the assembly line. So as you walk down the Gallardo line, you could see literally the cars were being, as you just said, built there. But and then in the back of the warehouse, the at the time the actual plate, warehouse, I'll call it that. It wasn't really a warehouse, but was massive, and there's a whole bunch of unused space. It's obviously where they're going to expand. And you could see the bodies in white of the Gallardos that were essentially sitting there. And now obviously they moved it to the Huracan line. So the bodies were made someplace, I think in Germany, and painted in Germany, and they are brought in, all the bodies, but all the cars were actually assembled in Italy. Then when you went over to the Aventador line, that was really fascinating because those cars were made and assembled in Italy. And the vibe on the Aventador line was completely different. So I'll tell you guys a funny story. So we're walking down, it was at the Gallardo line, first time we were there, and everyone was, not really buttoned up. I wouldn't say that to the extent that they're really, I would say it's more casual than I thought it would be. So we go down, you walk down this long line of the Gallardo line, and then you go to the left, and then you basically start around the corner and you start walking up the Aventador line. And then you see the people hand stitching the seats. They're not coming out of a box from Germany, Sparco. Then you see the people doing all the little handiwork on the cars in, tiny, tiny little assembly lines that, that's what a handmade car is. But what was really funny, as soon as we went around the corner, there was a guy doing work on an interior while eating an ice cream cone. I thought that was hilarious. And he saw this big mob of people coming around with, and he didn't care, just kept on eating his ice cream cone while I was working on the Lamborghini. That's Lamborghini. Whereas if you go to Ferrari is very modern feeling. People are very nice and sweet, and you can tell they're proud to be there. It's very buttoned up. It looks like something akin to some of the German manufacturing plants I've been to, but it does have a completely different feeling because of the fact that it is Ferrari. They have trees in the assembly line. And they still, obviously, you guys know they make their own motors and things like that. But we're going to talk about Ferrari in a second. So from automotive headlines, what is anything in particular in the last week that really caught your eyes? I know that the new GT3, 992 point dot has come out. Have you guys been following that? Any opinions on it?
Yeah, I've been following. I mean, Porsche seems to have these elongated launches. Like it felt like a few months ago we saw Andy Prudinger, kind of the Porsche PR angle of them, and now recently all of the automotive journalists are finally, must have been the embargo lifted. It all hit at once. Um, it is, I'm sure, a great car. And I think it's amazing how Porsche just keeps slicing thinner layers and these subtle differentiators. I think the motor is maxed out. You can't get any more power to pass emissions and everything else they have to. So they're trying desperately to keep a touring line available, a RS line, a GT3, and and now and then you have the specialty car ST. I think we're seeing a lot of the 911R to touring. ST comes out, a lot of that technology goes into the touring, and basically, from what I can understand, um, I don't know, the wing car seems to be more track focused. Like it used to be, if you wanted a GT3, they're kind of very similar. You just get one with a wing and one without. And both can come, well, the touring only came in manual until recently, but then you can get them with both transmissions. Now it seems like the GT3 is more like an RS Lite than a GT3.
Well,
So
that's what happened with the 992.1 GT3. It was, if you care about track times, it was quicker than the 991.2 GT3 RS. But you said something, you said about power. That the new one makes less torque than the 992.1. It makes less torque. I think it's the same horsepower. But what they did to compensate for it is, if I remember correctly, they made the sixth gear 8% shorter. So it revs faster, 9,000 RPM. So you're spending a lot more time than the fun spot on the tachometer. But but the car's heavier too. And so that's the reason they're coming out with Weissach on a GT3, which they hadn't before. But here's where my mind went from, owning a whole bunch of these things over the years, and you guys have too, and, you sold them, but the prices on these things. So they raised the base price, and I don't think I have this memorized, but by 40%. But then if you add the YSOC, and then if you do these other things, I think you're looking at a GT3 that's going to end up costing just a GT3, not an RS. You're probably looking at easily a car that's going to be in the mid 200s. And
I show that the
sorry.
GT3 is 225. The GT3 RS is almost 250. And it's funny. I know it's not all about horsepower, because obviously these are Porsches. I guess a better number would have been like how fast does it go around a track. But I just thought for fun, let me look at how much did it cost per horsepower on all the GT3s. And so the 2007 was $255 per horsepower. The RS 2025 is over $200 a horsepower more, $466 per horsepower.
Yeah, well, they're better fed horses.
We should do the math. So that means like the ZR1's like $100 a horsepower per
Well,
horse,
that'd be
or whatever.
right. Kentucky horses, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
but still, that's gonna again. I just not sure how much the market's gonna be able to. How many of those the market's gonna be able to absorb.
All of them.
At that, well, I guess, but at $300,000 basically is what we're talking about, and that's probably before a PTS. Oh, you want the ceramic brakes, sir? Oh, you want the magnesium wheels, sir? Oh, you want the carbon bucket, sir? Oh, you want to have the deviated stitching? Up. So let's call it 300 grand. That's before the dealers, there's any ADM, What's for $300,000 that I can think of quite a few back catalog used cars that probably are kind of viable alternatives to that. No? Am I wrong?
The oh my God 991.2 GT3 Touring paint to sample with no miles.
Totally.
Which is arguably a better driver's car, possibly.
Have you driven a 992 GT3 or GT3 RS? Have you, Greg?
No, I'm not.
So we had a touring. We had a 992.1, touring, okay, GT3 touring. And I can tell you that you can definitely tell the difference. And we also had a 991.2 GT3 RS. You can definitely tell the difference in the way the car goes into corners. The front suspension differences between 992 and 991 makes even an RS of the previous generation feel like it wants to wash out, wants to understeer a little bit in tighter corners. And so the new car, now our car had the rear steering. You add the rear steering along with the double wishbones in the front. You've got a car that it doesn't feel 911 like in how much it goes around corners. And that's one of the reasons that personally I didn't bond with it. I liked my old touring better. And it's funny that they got rid of the rear steering on the ST, because I must not have been the only one with that complaint. But that's kind of weird, because you'd think rear steering would make the experience more enjoyable, but it didn't. And I'm not really sure why. But have you guys heard any banter about that from enthusiasts?
Some of my clients who have 991.2 Tourings, who have experienced the new ones or even bought them and had them simultaneous and thought about like, which one do I keep? It became clear very quickly that they keep the 991.2 because it was more 911 like. And a lot of those guys have had McLarens, the latest from Lamborghini, or experienced them, and it becomes less differentiating between those cars. And I keep wondering with Porsche, like, are they just seeing how far they can get with a normally aspirated manual transmission engine car? Like, where's the point of saturation where they've got to have some kind of hybrid system attached? And I don't know if that works with manual and that's what's holding them back, or turbocharging. I mean, they're just going to get to a point like how many generations are the buyers going to be okay with the horsepower and torque not changing or going down?
Well, but to your point that you made a second ago, how different are the cars? Different enough. If you have a GT3 right now and it's a 992.1 GT3, and are you tempted to upgrade to the 0.2? Are you going to spend that, whatever the difference is? Are you going to do it? And see, the problem is that their cars are so amazing, and they've been so amazing for so long, that I'm not sure that the difference that actual real world users will, experience is that much better. And the past catalog, so we had a what was it? a gray car with the red wheels, 997, right? GT3.
7.2 GT3 RS, yeah.
Right. So we sold that car, and I don't even remember what year it was, but we sold that car for 165 or 175. And I saw one of those just sold on Bring a Trailer for 329.
Yeah, I sold a one owner 7,000 miles, same color combo a year and a half ago for 312.
But so that's somebody who's deciding not to buy the new car that's like what, 2 generations newer at this point and buy the old one, or maybe they're just adding it to their hoard. I don't know, but that's fascinating.
So maybe what we have now is the split. 991 and older are the Porsche enthusiasts, and 992 and newer are the Ferrari guys who couldn't get an allocation.
Oh, so see
Oh,
what he's doing?
nice.
See what he's setting us up for? Yeah, he wants to pick a Ferrari fight because he knows we're going to talk about that next. And he doesn't want to be left out. So he's going to be the bitter guy. That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, so before we start pivoting and talking about Ferraris, because Greg has got some insights on the classic Ferrari scene that every time I talk to him, I like to talk, but when I'm talking to Greg about old Ferraris, I like to listen. I mean, the dude's driven a real GTO. Okay. So I love listening to his podcast just so that I can hear the GTO at the end. So I'm probably one of the few people who listen to the end, Paul or Greg. In general, by the way, most people listen to podcasts for 20 minutes. Of course, yours are usually about that long anyway. In any event, so I'm a huge Ferrari sycophant, and I have been forever. And between Julie and I, she had a Portofino, she had 2 Californias that I know we've had. I'm not going to say 20, but damn near 20. At one point, when we were living in Texas, we had a Lusso, Julie's Portofino, we had a Pista, and we had an 812. The 812,
Wow.
the 812 was on order, and that's before we moved. So we had all those at once. Now the question is why'd you have all those? Why'd you have all those cars, other than the fact that we love Ferrari? And that's what we can talk about a little bit today, because Porsche and a lot of these other manufacturers, McLaren's starting to do it too, going down this road. You have to have a certain resume of previous cars and current cars before they'll offer you what might be considered more of a special car or a harder to get car. And when we were buying these when we were in Austin, they made it very clear. They said, when I walked into the store, I said I wanted a Pista, and they said, well, if you want a Pista, there's actually, I'll tell you the story because it might be interesting to some of the listeners. Is I called Dallas, Lamborghini Dallas, and they have a huge store, everything amazing. And I had a friend there, and he was assistant manager at the time. And I called him up and I said, I want to get a Pista. And he goes, Tim, we'd love to sell you a Pista. I had some other cars that they wanted to, take in on trade. And then he said, but there's about 20 people that would have to die first. And I thought, what are you talking about? And he goes, because we have such a list of customers who've been buying cars from us over and over and over for every generation that came out that are going to get whatever allocations we get. We can put you on a list, but I just want to be honest with you, you're never going to get anything. I said, so I want one of these Pista things. What should I do? He goes, well, and he's the one that told me what to do. He said, call up Austin, because Austin was in the process of opening up a larger store. They literally just opened it up. Call up Austin, tell them, and this is exactly what you're going to tell them. Order this car, this car, this car, this car in exchange for getting the Pista. And he was giving me advice on just all the little details and everything else. And so I did exactly what he said. And they followed through on their word, and they sold us one of the first Pistas that arrived in the United States. And that was in early 2019. And that car really was worth all the, stress and strain, trial tribulations, and all the man math that I had to do with Julie to explain to her why this was a good idea, But remember, she got a Portofino out of it, so it worked out for her too.
Do you still
So
have
what
it?
I was expecting for you to say is, he just says, make it look like an accident, and then click.
Well, do I still have them? So we ended up moving to a place where if you bring the cars in, you have to pay, that are not plug-ins or full EVs, you have to pay a 30% excise tax.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so we moved to Puerto Rico. So when you move to Puerto Rico, because I originally wanted to bring them all in, and I was working with the Ferrari dealer here, and they told me what the rule was going to be for me to bring all these cars in, how much it was going to cost, and I just couldn't rationalize it. That's the truth. But all those experiences ended up well in every regard. And from that experience, I have to say, I really got to know the brand. We went to Maranello. They invited us to the private events. They would, call me randomly. I get these calls from, my phone would say Maranello, Italy, and I'd answer, and be this sweet Italian lady that's asking questions about just all these things. But I'd never had an experience like that with Porsche. So Ferrari really, really does coddle their customers And even though you have to jump through a whole bunch of fiery burning hoops to be a customer of Ferrari, it's worth it. It's really, you know, we should start out with that, because not very many people say that. Everyone likes to talk about how hard it is. It is hard, but it's worth it. Anything worth having is usually not going to be that easy to obtain. So I just wanted to put that out there as far as new cars go. Now, fast forward to get that piece to now, I probably would have to have at least 4 cars in inventory in my garage. I'd have to have probably at least, so to get the 296 VS, whatever it's going to be, if I was living back in Austin, I would imagine I would have to have probably, you know, at least, you know, a Roma, probably a Pur Sangue. I most certainly have to have a 296. I probably have to have a Pista. And so the rules for you to be considered for one of these cars is gotten more and more stringent. And I mentioned this on our show the other day. I have friends that wanted an F50, and the requirements to get F50s are everything what I just said times about 20. Then you have to have usually about 25 or $30 million of Ferraris, current ones and back catalog Ferraris in your garage before that's like the dealer in Ferrari will allow you the privilege of being able to order one. And I do mean privilege. And I know you think I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not, because it really is a privilege. I mean, the F50s, and I don't even want to talk about money, but the experience of getting one of those cars, there's no parallel to it on planet Earth. Every other manufacturer, Porsche, Pagani, it doesn't matter who, they live in complete awe of what Ferrari's been able to create. So with that said,
Oh yeah.
that's my perspective. We're not going to ask Paul his perspective unless he wants to contribute here.
No, and actually, I am amazed because, like you said, I just hear this myopic viewpoint, which is stereotyped and, you know, hyperbole about the Ferrari experience. I mean, I always wonder, because it's known that Enzo hated his customers. It was basically, I want to go racing, and if I have to do this to go racing. So I
I'll do
think
it.
that's kind of where it permeates from, was like, okay, he has to deal with these pesky customers and deliver cars to them to fund what he's passionate about. And I always felt that, oh, that must have just prevailed. Hearing your perspective that they actually know that they can only manage so many clients. So they're going to build so many cars. It feels different. Like, instead of like, we can build these cars and there's a limited number just based on our capacity. It sounds like, no, we can only handle X number of clients. So we're only going to build enough cars for those clients.
Well, compound what you just said, and I thank you for acknowledging this and listening and not trying to listen through filters, because their problem is even more challenging than that. Everybody, like the Ferrari is the ultimate aspirational brand, I think, of any brand, of any product made, period. And so those customers have a certain level of expectation, but Ferrari, from my experience, their level of expectation for the customer is actually higher than what the customer's expectation is from Ferrari. So Ferrari, when you go to Ferrari, your experience at Ferrari, just from the way that the people act and the vibe you have, you go through the whole thing and you come out and it doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel like you were just in a manufacturing facility. It feels like you were, I am going to say what I was thinking. It feels like you went to, I'm going to catch shit for saying it, but it just is the same. When you go to Vatican City in Rome, when you go there and you walk in there, and especially when you see the cathedral and all that, I'm not saying, you know, I'm not confusing, you know, religion and God with Ferrari. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the feeling you get as a car enthusiast after having been to Ferrari, even if you don't own one, is nothing like I've ever experienced from any other manufacturer of any product. Every other product, even one that's mass produced, and the Ferrari production cars are mass produced, they don't feel mass produced, and they don't let you feel like you're buying a mass-produced product. Does that make sense? That's what's different. And they do have production capacity issues. And, you know, so, I mean, there you go. But there is a bit of, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about a lot of the Ferrari customers, because there is, I think, a bifurcation of the type of people that are buying Ferraris, especially with Pur Sangues and the Romas. And I personally think Roma Spider is one of the most beautiful cars ever made. But if you look at, for example, a lot of people are now starting to buy Ferraris just because it's a high-end status brand. And that is what happened to Porsche. And that's what happened to a lot of other manufacturers. But look what Lamborghini was able to do that. They were able to sell the Urus. People were buying Uruses that maybe weren't previous anything sports car fans. They were buying because there's prestige brand. And yet Lamborghini's been able to still crank out some, you know, cooler and cooler cars. So What are you thinking, Greg? I could banter about this forever, trust me.
Well, first off, I wonder how many Tahoes do I need to buy to get a ZR1, or is that they don't have that same program, do they?
I bet they do. Have you, I know you're being funny, but actually getting a ZR1 is a lot easier. Getting on a list to get one, and then you just wait your turn because they're going to make enough for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And they've tried to do some stuff, they have, you could pay extra to do a factory tour, you could pay extra to put the emblems on your car. Nowhere close to the special thing of Ferrari. So, but that goes to the higher price point. I mean, they're pushing people higher and higher because they can. And I don't want to get back to the tariff thing, but I think a bigger impact might be Canada, because think of all the GM cars that are made up in Canada and Ford. So if we're doing a 35% tax on Canadian cars, that's going to hit the middle class a lot more than 30% tax on a Ferrari. I think the Ferrari folks will just gobble it up. So I think just going back, I think the tariff implications would be much higher on Canadian goods, especially if it includes automobiles.
Canadians' biggest imports were if I remember correctly, were maple syrup, wood, and paper. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, but yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. So here's something that I've had this question from several of my friends that want Ferraris but haven't been able to work their minds into like paying for one. And the question is a Ferrari really that much better as a car, as the actual product, brand and prestige and history and pedigree aside, is the actual product, the actual car, that much different or better than an equivalent, like say, a Porsche? What do you guys think?
I mean, I think, I think nowadays in modern times, it's getting really hard to distinguish this high-end sports car from McLaren to Ferrari to even Porsche, because there's so many restrictions on what you can build. And I would say Porsche's biggest differentiator is they're the last to have a manual transmission for the most part. But I think when you look back, in the 80s, like I've been the last 2 days just knee deep in this 87 328, and it's been a while since I've had one of these cars to sell, and I'm trying to assimilate and understand. I'm comparing against, an 80s 940, we have a 944 Turbo S and a 928 and a 911, all the same contemporary cars. And my question I keep asking myself is it better? Is it as bad as I think it is? Is it better than I think it is? I think the quality isn't quite there, and that's just sort of epidemic Italian versus German. But I think they were so different. Like they had their way of doing it. They stayed in their lane. They weren't looking at what all the other manufacturers were doing. I think all the standards for the world, which is the global standards. It used to be, okay, this is that country, this is that country. We all have different things. You got different cars, and now everything's just a global same product, and it's hard to differentiate. So as much as maybe the quality of how the screws were put in wasn't as good, I do appreciate that it was its own unique experience, and it was
Let me,
totally different.
let's debate about this, okay? Because you said quality. So I have disassembled 911s from the 80s. I didn't disassemble my 944 turbo, but I had an 87 944 turbo. Love that car. And I've also did I'd say a half restoration on a 328, a GTS that I bought just so I could, get my hands dirty and take it all apart. And I did. I took it all apart. And I'll tell you, having done all of that, the complexity inside the Ferrari is at least 50% more parts and steps and clips and all these things than the equivalent 911. It is amazing. And I'm not saying amazing good or amazing bad. As the cars got older, like I had to find a headliner for this thing because somebody at some point was smoking in it, and there's like, it was kind of dodgy. I bought it on purpose because I wanted a project car, a hobby. Anyway, when you looked at the material for the headliner and you compare it to like the vinyl headliner that went in an equivalent 911, I'm not criticizing. I love all these cars. And then when you take the door panels off the Ferrari and you look at the leather, and you look at how the interior of the door was put together, Like people have this, and I'm sure it's earned, like I've also, though I didn't disassemble it, I've seen a Countach of the same vintage disassembled. Have you ever seen that before?
Those are garbage.
But have you ever seen that, Greg?
Yes, I have. You're not kidding.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
kit car. It's a kit car.
it's amazing the chassis on those things. So we were on a tour in Italy in 2011, a car guy tour. Frank, I forget his last name. You guys, I bet you Greg knows him. A really cool experience. And we went to there's one place in particular that's really famous for restoring these vintage Ferraris, and it was massive. And when you saw the older Lamborghinis disassembled, they really were kit cars. Unbelievable. You saw that just the chassis, they were square tubes, and you could see the welds. Sometimes they wouldn't even go all the way around. It's like, okay, cool stuff. But I'm not sure. When someone says the quality of a car or the quality of this or quality of that, I'm not really sure what they mean by that. I think because having gotten my hands dirty on both of them, I'm not really sure what
I don't think it's necessarily, it just, when you drive it, it just feels less solid to me. I mean, that's my perspective. I haven't disassembled either car. I've seen them disassembled. I've been, on the Porsche side in the restoration part. And, the 328, 308s were the most mass produced for Ferrari of that time, and probably up to that point. They hadn't built so many cars. But I just think it felt like when you drove them, the Porsche just could put up with more beating, felt less fragile, felt more like it wasn't going to rattle hard.
But when you're saying felt, right? So your perception from your preference on how you drive, you interpret your perception and how you
Right.
drive. You're translating that to the word quality.
Right. Now, granted, I just was on a rally, and a guy had a 328 or 308, and he went 2,000 miles and beat the living tar out of it, and it didn't miss a beat, and he loves it. There's been guys you've seen who've taken a 328 and safaried it and driven to Alaska, and I've seen that one at some car shows, and it's incredible. It always felt to me that it was harder to push those cars than the equivalent Porsche. Harder to get the speed and the performance. They seemed, where one was a little more sports car, those were a little more GT, at least of that era.
No, I think
Uh,
you're right about that. I think a 328 is definitely more of a GT car than a 911 was in that era. I don't think anyone would argue with you about that. Greg, what's your thought on all of this?
I don't have a ton of seat time behind Ferraris, unfortunately, but I can talk to kind of some of the stuff in the auction. Like, it's funny because, we all know that most of the Ferraris and Italian cars in the 80s and 90s were just basically a couple levels above a kit car. And I remember one funny conversation about a 355 Spider we had, and it was like, well, if it's I'm making it up, but if it's a 95, the top will never work. If it's a 97, it works like 50% of the time. And if it's the very last 100, it works about 80% of the time. Like, it was just known issue. And this was from new. They were known that way. And, the Acura NSX is the one that kind of forced Ferrari to become more reliable, because of that Honda engineering. And so I think you've seen a dramatic increase. I'm in love with Porsches and the build quality of Porsches. And I have friends that have Ferraris, and it feels great inside. It feels nice inside. I have a suspicion if I lived a long time in both of them, the Porsche would be that much better and tighter, no matter what the price point is personally. But that's just based on the cars I have been in. But yeah, when you look at these cars at auction, if you look at a Maranello, 550 or 575, you'll know immediately if they haven't fixed the sticky button issue.
These
I
are
don't know,
old cars. You're talking about cars from the 90s at this point.
yeah.
I mean, a 90s Greg or Paul's favorite car, 993. He waxed poetic about those endlessly. I'm so glad we haven't got him to talk about him yet. Anyway, so I mean, a 993 of that era won't have as many. There's going to be more things that are plastic on the inside. There's not going to be a leather dash necessarily. There's going to be a vinyl dash, and so those things are generally speaking going to wear better. So over time, your perception is one's built better than the other. Like I said, I'm a Ferrari sycophant. I told everyone when we started today. So I can't change my stripes. But I mean, if we're comparing apples to apples, I guess is what I'm saying, just kind of reeling it back in. When you compare a new Ferrari 320 or a new Ferrari 296 versus an equivalent of and just product for product, and you drive it against the McLaren or you drive it against whatever the other cars are, I still think, and again, I'm biased, but I still think there's a significant difference between just the product, moving aside from the brand and just experiencing the actual car. If you've got an sort of a mechanical eye to it, then you could start seeing other things. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I said, I'm biased.
Maybe we should keep this for whenever we talk about British cars, but I am confused about McLarens because I have clients that swear they'll never have another McLaren because the build quality is so horrible. The trim falls off, it's held on with double-sided tape, and you can't get it. Then I have others that are absolutely in love with their McLarens and will never sell it or say a bad thing about it. So I am truly confused. So we could save that to the British car show.
Yeah, we should. That's a great theme for the coolest thing about the McLaren, amongst many things, is that all carbon fiber chassis. That's really quite extraordinary. Have you guys driven a carbon fiber car? Yeah. What have you driven, Paul?
I mean, I sold a McLaren a couple years ago, and I intentionally drove it up to my Friday drive up the mountains just so I could have experienced it. Of course, I got pulled over, not for speed, but I got pulled over by a cop on a vintage Harley motorcycle. I didn't even know he was a real cop.
That's cool.
And I think when he got to me and realized I wasn't the profile of who he thought would be driving it, he just gave me a ticket for no dealer plate hanging on. I forgot to put it on. It was in my passenger seat, and of course he wouldn't let me put it on there while he waited. But driving the car, I could see why people love those cars because they are insanely capable cars. I mean, and they will drive like a regular car and you can drive in traffic and they just kind of are magic suspension, magic setup. And I think there's other people who don't experience the full range of what those cars can do. And you just look at the build quality and you look at the stupid stuff that fails. And I'm sure dealing with McLaren from a repair standpoint, it's a little tough. But going back to Ferrari, I just want to mention one thing about Ferrari. I mean, I think the magic about Ferrari and the aspiration is almost like a thing that gets handed down. Like, I didn't grow up in a family that loved Porsches. In fact, my dad notoriously called him overpriced, puffed up Beetles. I mean, my whole childhood, he could not stand Porsches. He wanted a Ferrari, and because that wasn't going to happen, the Corvette was the best next thing. And it started back in the 60s. He was living in Hawaii. My mom and him both had MGBs. He had a MGB Spider. My mom had a GT, brand new. And on Hawaii, they had a 1-year-old Ferrari 275 GTB. And he got a test drive in it. And basically, they wanted $12,000 for the used 5,000-mile Ferrari, and he just bought 2 new MGs for $4,000 combined. And the next year bought the house I grew up in for $30,000. So a $12,000 Ferrari wasn't happen, but that sound imprinted permanently on him, and the shifter, the clicking of the shifter and the gated shifter. I mean, it was literally the shifter and the sound imprinted on him that it was literally the theme of my automotive childhood was that car. And everything we went to was always about Ferrari until probably the 308s, until the mid-engine stuff came. He was always a 12-cylinder guy. And actually experiencing any of these, and I haven't experienced anything newer than a 430. No, a California, which I didn't understand why people hated him because I thought it was a lovely car. But that sound those Ferraris make and a gated shifter is kind of like you forgive everything and you feel guilty about hating on them the way you hate on them when your friends are around. And I see why they love it. The other part of it, I just don't understand.
Well, how much of the people's conceived disdain for Ferrari is because they're hard to get and they're expensive and they're owned by people that obviously have put in the effort to buy the car versus, I mean, isn't that it? How can you dislike Ferrari from what
I think it's some of the people. I think it's the veneer of the people we see who enjoys them. And
I enjoy them. You guys don't like me?
I know, but There's
You're the
douchey
exception.
Porsche owners too. I know douchey Porsche owners, but like I remember when we were selling the 430, I made a little video of it, and my entrance to the video, which was awesome when it got on Ferrari Chat because it did not rub well, was I got a pair of white shoes I got from like Payless shoe store, and I spray painted them red on the video and put a big sticker on the nose of it and said, "Okay, now I'm ready to drive my 430." And it was just this, just making fun of the stereotype.
So you're
It's so
finally,
funny because
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't see the stereotype very much. I think people are upset because that's a level, and myself included. I'll probably never. I don't know when I'll be able to afford a Ferrari, much less an F40. I love to have an F40, but that gap of being able to acquire just seems to be so vast to some people, I think. And then they also see some people that they don't think deserve it. You know,
Well,
right,
so
wrong, or indifferent. They're people making judgment calls based on what they see with their eyeballs and not with their brain, or they don't have any relationship with the person. But I just judged at Cavallino, and they are the people I met are the nicest people in the world. Super. Now obviously I was a judge, and so that makes a little bit difference. Wasn't just some guy walking by, but everybody's super, super nice. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a gap. It's like a wage gap, I think. They're jealous of what they can't have, and so that paints them in a bad light, possibly.
yeah, I think that's what it is too. And that's unfortunate because if people were to, so I grew up poor. And when Julie and I got married 34 years ago, and we started two businesses together, my goal was to buy a Ferrari before I was 30. And that's basically what I used as motivation. It was just Julie, me, and four cats and a little dinky house in Clintonville, Ohio.
So you're the
And
cat guy. I thought it was
yeah,
Paul.
exactly. That's so I know when I see them. Yeah. So anyway, that's a different story. We didn't mean to end up with four cats, but I don't think anyone would ever, mean to end up with four cats. Anyway, so I got the Ferrari, and I'll never ever forget the whole experience. And it was people make fun of it. It was a 348, but it was a Spider, and it was just a really brilliant, really fun car. It didn't handle very well, that's true, but it sounded amazing. And it was interesting because I had some of the German cars prior to that. And as soon as I got that Ferrari, there was no question that people definitely would treat me with disdain. And almost like they had a perception of a Ferrari owner. And even though I've known them for a long period of time, the second I got the Ferrari, they wanted to paint me in some, like, I don't even know. I still don't understand completely to this day. I think Greg got it closest, and that's unfortunate because then it holds them back from ever having that experience, because they could have done what I did. They could have worked. They could have started some businesses. They could have sold. And hell, you can buy a really sweet, one of my favorite Ferraris of all time, a 308. I mean, how about a GT4? From the 70s. Those are awesome.
You're right. There are some attainable.
There's,
I'm more concerned about the maintenance costs, I think.
Well, you're
and everything
tall
else.
too.
I
Honestly, you're
mean,
tall. So you
Yeah.
might not fit in some of these.
I mean, I think the maintenance cost gets to a point where they're all old cars. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say my 928 rivals any vintage for 80s Ferrari for sure in maintenance cost and frustration. And I think you know, I mean, my favorite Ferrari, we sold a 550 Maranello about 10 years ago, and I'm like, I'm going to drive this car for 2 weeks and use it as a car, and it was absolutely awesome, and I love it. And actually, here's the irony: is my dad, going back to what kind of changed him from Ferrari. We were always, one car. Like my dad had a car, my mom had a car. There was no third car, let alone nine cars. And he ended up, the company he was working for, he was retiring. He got a little money and he was going to finally buy something special. And he wanted a 550 Ferrari, a 550 Maranello. This is like 1999, 2000. He ended up with a 2002 996 Turbo. Another long story. He went down to several Ferrari dealers to buy that car, to order it or take what they had. He wasn't really picky. But he wouldn't do it unless he got to go for a test drive. He didn't even have to drive it. He just wanted to go in the car. And they just treated him like such crap, to the point where we had press passes at the time, and we went to the LA Auto Show on the press thing, and that was when Ferrari used to be at the LA Auto Show, and Giacomo, whatever, the head GM or the head North America guy, was there. And my dad kind of explained to him, like, hey, I'm ready to buy a 550 Maranello. And I want that car. But this is my only thing. I want to go. I don't even have to drive it. And he says, no problem. We'll hook you up. He got the connection. The guy who was there with Beverly Hills was there. Long story short, 2 more weeks of trying to go there and get a test drive. He never did. And by 2001, he didn't like the next generation, the 575 or whatever. And, and he wanted a new car. My dad had never bought a used car until we got into the auto kennel business. He basically wanted a new Ferrari, and he ended up test driving a new Boxer and bought a turbo from it. And that was that.
I am sorry your dad had that experience. But you know what? He's in his 80s, right?
Yeah.
You know what a good son would do?
Yeah.
That's what a good son would do. You read my mind. Go out and give him a 550.
No, it's not worth the pain I'll hear from my mom. My mom will kill me. But about 20 years ago, a really good friend who was supposed to be the partner of the auto kenneling, unfortunately passed away young, too early. He had an insane collection. And he's one of these guys, so humble, British expat, I think hiding from British taxes in the US. Every time I would say, oh, I've always liked those, in the most humble way would say, you could see him processing his inventory because he had 100 cars at any one time on like 4 different continents. And he'd go, yeah, I have one of those. It's at my Falkland house. And so his name is John Nichols. I go, John, my dad's birthday's coming up. Is there I'm sure you have a 275 of any flavor. Like, I just wanted for a day to go have my dad drive a 275. And the funny thing is, he's like counting which ones would make sense.
Wow. That's my dream car there.
And he goes, but it turned out that they were broken. He's like, but I have a 250 short wheelbase. Will that work? And I said, that'll be just fine. And unfortunately went to the hospital, passed away, never got to do it. And I've been trying to figure out how to get my dad a day in a 275, because you can't go rent those from Turo or anywhere else. But I mean, that is his tap.
Greg Stanley, your local Ferrari aficionado up here who judges at Cavallino, probably has a few people who might have one that you could probably,
We could probably figure that out. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm at the point now. I don't think he should drive it. I would feel horrible.
I'll give him a ride. You can sit in the back seat. Well, we'll do it we'll do it in Monterey at the auction. We should have one in there.
Well, Greg, so let's pivot on the vintage Ferraris are one of the most extraordinary markets to watch, especially when you go to the auctions. And I've had some of the strongest, most entertaining memories watching vintage Ferrari guys bid on vintage Ferraris and then listening to them talk about, what they have and just the whole exchanging and just getting to know some of these people internationally. And back to the personality types of the people like Ferraris, there definitely tends to see a bifurcation between new Ferrari buyers and vintage Ferrari buyers. I mean, our owners, there definitely is something different there. Because you guys have probably had these experiences too. And listeners and viewers, if you guys have not had these experiences, I encourage you to go out to next time Cavallino there's different Ferrari things all over the place. Show up and just look at the cars and appreciate the cars. I've had experiences where I was standing next to some big name from industry or whatever, and looking at this Ferrari and started talking to him, or just looking at the car, admiring it. And the next thing I know, I'm realizing I'm talking to a billionaire, And that happens in Porsche things and Corvette things and different things you go to as well. But my only point is when you are a car enthusiast, it does not matter whether you're where you are in the financial spectrum, we're all the same. And I think that's ultimately what attracts all of us to the car world. And it's unfortunate, and it's true, that the more expensive cars, the people are the same. They had the Volkswagen Scirocco's, and then they trade them up and got a GTI, and then they got a used 944, and they just been, bump. And now they just buy a new Pagani. But they're the same person that had that 1976 Volkswagen Scirocco in there in high school. And to think that those people are unapproachable, or they think they're not just like you. They're just like you that probably started a business, that probably put a hell of a lot more time in, probably sacrificed things that, maybe in retrospect they wouldn't have sacrificed, things like that. It's an interesting phenomenon that most millionaires in the United States are first generation millionaires. It's like less than 5%, I think, inherited their wealth. And most of them are millionaires because the equity in their principal residences. So when you run across somebody with a fancy, expensive car, again, it's just time. It's up to bats. It's how long, it's probably someone in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, and they've just been a car enthusiast forever. So don't allow your preconceived notions about, what type of person it is to cloud your judgment, because that's just silly. And it's cutting you off to really one of the, more experiences in life. That's putting hopefully a period at the end of that. So, Greg, sorry, let's talk about the vintage world as far as Ferraris go. What are you seeing? What's hot? What's not? What are you seeing that has, as far as values go? Like for example, I've been watching Dino values because I would love to get a Dino, a GTS, chairs and flares, the whole thing. Those things were selling in the mid 200s, and now I think those cars are what, $700,000-800,000 range. I haven't really been following them, but in the Dino world, in the Ferrari world in general, what's going on?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. So a couple different things for Dinos. They're actually a little soft right now. We actually had a Dino that did not sell, and it was more of a driver Dino, but it was realistic estimate like 350 to 425, and it did not sell in Scottsdale. They always look at Dino. Dino doesn't have a Ferrari badge on it anywhere. If it does, it's not factory correct. People like to throw that Ferrari badge on there because it was made by Ferrari, but technically it's a Dino. It's not a Ferrari. Well, it's a Ferrari, but technically it shouldn't say anywhere on the car.
You're saying
But
from a judging perspective right now, right? You're
yeah,
saying
but just in general, I mean, if you have a Ferrari badge on your Dino, it's kind of like a douchebag move kind of thing because you're doing it because you want attention as an owner of a Ferrari. It's not just about the driving experience of a cool car.
Didn't the Ferrari dealers, when those cars were sitting at the Ferrari dealers, take the Dino badges off and put Ferrari badges on them? Didn't the dealers in America do
They
that?
did that eventually because they weren't selling that great to start off.
Yeah.
And so for a long time now, Dinos have eclipsed Daytona prices. So you're
Wow.
comparing a rear engine 6-cylinder to a front engine V12 Ferrari, and that's slowly equalizing out right now. So Dinos are a little soft. Daytonas are back up. There was a Daytona that sold recently for like not a Spider obviously, but one that sold recently for 750, something like that. But they were down at 550, 600 for 2 years.
And they
And
were
so
over six figures too. I mean, over seven figures at one point, weren't they?
I don't know about a coupe. I know the Spiders have been. Coupes
Yeah.
got close though. They were at least in the 900s. I think maybe is a record. But yeah, so Dinos though, great, beautiful cars, great driving cars, great balanced cars. The Daytonas are typically, people call them truckish until you get up to a higher level of speed, and it's more of a boulevard cruiser, GT car. The 12 cylinders from the 60s, especially the 50s, has been down. A lot of that has to do with the generational shift. You mentioned that a lot of the new Ferrari buyers are new Ferrari buyers. They're not necessarily looking back. A lot of old Ferrari guys are only old Ferrari guys, because they can't necessarily get into the cycle of the new stuff. So it's pretty interesting. You will have some folks that have both, but if they have both, they usually don't go that far back into the 60s. But there's some just incredible cars. I mean, F40s are basically flat right now. F50s are still increasing. I think they're going to continue to increase. I think they've aged well. We had a world record of like $5.5 million last year at Monterey. We've got one coming up in our Miami sale. I think it's now 5.5 to 6.5 is the estimate. I mean, they only made either 249 or 349 cars of the F50. I never thought those were great looking, but they've definitely aged well in my mind. I love the F40s. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I feel like the late 60s 330 GTCs are getting a lot of love right now because it's a 4-seater. They're expensive, but they're getting really I hear a lot of people talking about how well they drive. It has a small A-pillar. It's a front engine V12 manual. You've got a little extra room in the back, good greenhouse. So it's interesting how things, people continue to refine their tastes as they learn more and more about it, and more people seems to be steam gaining on certain cars as they dive into it a little bit more.
So when you're, amongst all your other folks that are helping people put collections together or help people selling cars or upgrading cars and all the rest of it, you're saying you're seeing more people focus on Dinos right now than Daytonas. That's what I heard you say. I think I heard you say that.
No, I said that Dinos valuation wise have eclipsed Daytonas for the last 2 years. And I think that's slowing down and it's evening back out. In my mind, a front engine V12 Ferrari should always be worth more than a rear engine 6-cylinder Dino. I guess is the best way to put it.
And Greg, what about that one recently at auction that sold for $1 million? Do you know? I mean, I had a few
Was
clients
it a
call.
Dino?
Yeah, it was a Dino. I mean, it was within a couple of weeks ago,
Okay.
online auction, and I had a couple clients who have Dinos. I don't know much about them. I've never sold one, came close to selling one, and he just said, is this the right time? And I said, well, I have to look at it. I don't think they're apples to apples, but like, is that why you're selling it? Like, or you're not
Yeah,
using
that's probably the most frustrating thing is you'll get one world record price for some crazy reason, and then everybody thinks their car is worth that world record price. And then it's probably in an auction atmosphere where the auction bug really hit and they don't want to take it to auction. They just want to sell it privately for a world record price. I'm not sure. I mean, Adinos have been hot. It would have to have been a chairs and flares, where it was just
Yeah,
absolutely
I just
immaculate.
pulled it up. It was online auction. It was literally a week ago. It was a 69 Dino 206 GT sold for $1 million plus premium. It was
Where'd it sell?
It's a
uh,
206, not a 246. I think that's the reason why. Because if
okay.
I remember correctly, the production in the 206 is a lot less than the
Yeah,
246.
it was a 206. It was out of Carpinteria here, Southern California. It was a very pretty Azzurro metallizzato, like a light blue metallic. It had 45,000 miles. It looked stunning. It didn't look like it was coming from, well, the seller was called Prancing Horse on the
Was
auction.
who auctioned it?
Bring a trailer. And it was a,
Okay. So I'm looking
so
at my database and they don't include bring a trailer. And that's also, bring a trailer, you got to be careful because I think we talked about this before. If I want to create a new market level for my car, it's the max is going to cost. If I want to take my car from $700,000 to $1 million, not saying it would, but if I can, if it's a $700,000 car and I throw it on bring a trailer and I have a buddy of mine bid against me, it's going to cost them $7,500. But if my car was a no sale at $950,000, when it's a $700,000 car, there's some stuff that can happen. I know that nobody wants that to happen, but there have been a couple. I'm just looking now, like Gooding had one that got up close to $1 million about 2 years ago. The 206s are rare, and there's certain levels of those, like I forgot what they called it, the L type or something, where the changes mid pace made it a little bit better driving car than some of the earlier ones, kind of like the Jaguar XKE, the what do you call it? The type or the series
220.
one.
Oh, this, yes, sir. I mean, but to Tim's point, or to your point, Greg, I get to the point where, okay, $1 million, I want to, in a vintage Ferrari, it's got to have 12 cylinders,
Yeah.
and
Right.
or I mean, think about it. You can go get one of the nicest Periscopa early Countachs. I mean, not great build quality, but it's a Periscopa Countach in a cool color, or maybe I mean, there just seems like there's a lot of choices. So I just don't understand. I've always liked Dinos. They're the most Porsche like Ferrari of that era. I mean, they're like a 904. They're really cool. I've always liked them. I I can't get over even the $300,000 price range for a driver for one.
Right. Right. Well, and one thing I do want to mention since we're on Ferraris here is Sotheby's is selling the Le Mans winning 1965 250 LM. And I think the estimate is like, I want to say it's like $32 million. Now, do you guys have a guesstimation as what that's actually going to sell for?
If I remember correctly, it's Rosso Corsa with the blue nose. Is that correct? Am I remembering the right car?
No, this is the red 250 LM that's been at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum for 50 years. And it won. It's the last front engine V12 Ferrari to win. So anyways, it's selling. By the time we post this, it will have sold. The estimate is in excess of 25 million euros. The only privateered entered Ferrari to ever win the 24 Hours of Le Mans overall. And what's interesting, I was talking to Ken Gross about that car, and he said that car was never expected to win. And so when they put it on the track, they put it on the track at Le Mans to go like hell, just because they were trying to wear out the other cars. All right, be the rabbit, get all the Ford GT40s to chase you until their engines blow up. but the Ferrari just never died. And they said it got to be such an extent they had to go to the old tires to see if they had some they could still run, because they were running out of tires because they didn't expect it to last that long. And then it won Le Mans overall.
Well, see, that story is what you're paying for.
That's a
Absolutely.
cool
Well, yeah.
car.
Yeah.
That's the story.
Now I want the car.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all in.
Before
Right.
that, it was a bunch of letters and numbers and red. I'm like,
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
cool.
And
Well,
it's like I think the last LM that sold was around $17 million privately. And so you're looking at $28 million for this one. I think that feels a little low, you know? I mean, we were having a conversation about, should this be worth GTO money? I don't think so. I don't think it's $50-60 million, but that Le Mans history is so significant. It'll be really interesting to see how this car sells.
So I'm going to share, and Greg, you know about this because I tried to help you do a deal with this guy, my friend who will name.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I have a friend who sold a Michael Schumacher Formula One car, and he sold this one through, RM, I think in Hong Kong or something. In any event, he was wanting to buy another one. He's interested in one. Sure enough, these guys, RM has another one for sale, and I introduced him to Greg, and he, it was a silent auction, silent bid thing. But I learned a lot from when he was deciding to put that car for sale. He and I helped him quite a bit trying to figure out the best way to sell it and where to buy it, or where to value it, right? Because you got to know what you're walking into, because it's not like these things are showing up on Bring a Trailer. This is an honest to God winning Formula One, Michael Schumacher, the whole thing. Not a test car, but it won, I think it was 2 or 3 races. Matter of fact, now I'm thinking about it more, I think it won the first Formula One race that Michael Schumacher won with Ferrari. I think that's the accurate way. So we came across somebody who had documentation of all Shaughnessy. I think it was Shaughnessy. That was
Tom Shaughnessy.
Yeah, I think that was who it was, who had all the documentation of okay, this is crazy. So there was a guy who used to sit outside in the late 90s when Schumacher, really early 90s, when Schumacher was racing for Ferrari, and he would have a telephoto lens, ding, 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 ding. And when they were out there racing the cars, he would write down the day, write down the weather, write down whether it was Rubens or whether it was Michael, write down all the things. And he kept a massive database of what cars were on the track at what time, the whole thing. And so you could go through this guy's 3-ring binder, and you could actually see the actual history beyond just knowing when it was the information you got from Ferrari. And so that little extra package of information, to the point that Greg was just making with regards to the history of the other one, really put a tremendous, I think, extra value that was maybe worth $1 million or $2 million more to the potential buyer, because that's what he got more than what the estimate was for at auction. So when you're going to buy or sell some of those really crazy cars, but I'm going to tell you something that's really, I thought was fascinating. Again, we haven't mentioned his name, but he had a high buyer status with Ferrari. And as soon as he sold that car, did I tell you this, Greg?
You did.
As soon as he sold that car, not through Ferrari, the dealer, we had the same dealer, told us that he lost his high status with Ferrari. So he had taken delivery on an 812 Competizione, which was one of those cars you only get when Ferrari selects you as a buyer. So he evidently was put down to a slightly lower status. And when he learned that, that's motivating him to want to buy another Formula One car. I haven't yet told him, I'm having lunch with him tomorrow actually, that the new parameters for getting on the list to get these super hard to get cars is now like 10x more complicated than it was, just even a year or two ago. But the whole inner workings of this thing it's fascinating, especially when you get to the historic race cars. I'm interested what your experience is with some of this stuff, Greg, because you're at the front lines talking to some of the guys that are repping these sellers.
And by the way, guys, I have a hard out in just 5 minutes.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't have much experience with that as a consultant. I've had a little bit, not a ton, but I do want to talk about it does relate. So when I was at Cavallino, the racing book for Classic K is a white book. So that means it's recognized by Ferrari as a significant, doesn't mean it's not a road car. Race cars get the white book, but also significant special models get a white book. Regular production cars get the red book. And when I was at Cavallino, one of the cars we had to judge was a Sergio 458 Sergio. Have you ever heard of that car?
Yeah. It was a one-off, wasn't it? They make literally
they made 6 of them. They made 6 of them, 3 for the US and 3 for overseas. And so we're looking at this thing. It's pretty cool. it's a little odd. Like I think the 458 is more attractive, but it's a one-off. It has no rear window, no performance specs. It's all like one-off interior and exterior and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, so it's just one of those cars that kind of same kind of deal. You had to be a special person to order it for sure. But then they couldn't get rid of them for a while, but the guy didn't take delivery on them. But it has the kind of racing book that you would find in something like that. So I don't know what it takes to get a special one-off nowadays. You know, I mean, I'm sure it's something insane. But your buddy needs to buy another Formula One car, right?
Yeah, well, you
Well, I
have
don't
his
know. Will that get him in, or the new rules would still have to, you know?
he would comply with the new rules. He'll go back and buy back catalog cars. I know he would.
Yeah.
And do you know of anyone that happens to be in the vintage car Ferrari business by chance, Greg? Do you know of anyone that sells those
I
things?
know. Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, well, there's a nice lead for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's writing it down. Do you see that?
That's right.
So along those lines, because Paul has to roll, if anyone wants to get in contact with any of us, obviously Paul owns Auto Kennel, Greg works at Sotheby's RM Auctions. Their contact information is down below in the show description. If for whatever reason you want to get a hold of me for, I'm not the car business, I'm just the nerdy enthusiast that's trying to learn from these guys, as I'm sure all of you guys are as well. If you have any show ideas, if you have any suggestions, areas for improvement, it doesn't matter. Just let us know. Put it in the comments below. Please do us a favor and like and subscribe to the show. Share it with other folks so we can help get the word out. And we really obviously love doing this show. We're going to introduce some guests. We each have our own little Rolodex of friends. We have to sort of, ask them kindly to be on the show, and we'll be introducing you guys. And our goal, I have to say, from this podcast is to go deeper than what most other podcasts will do. Most podcasts will just glaze over the topics and they'll just bounce over. I mean, I listen to a million podcasts, everyone does nowadays. But what we're going to do is we want to take a topic and we really want to drill down so that you guys can maybe benefit from it more so than just knowing the price of something that's sold on Bring a Trailer. So hopefully you're liking our style and what we're doing. And if not, let us know. And if you have any suggestions, let us know as well. So thank you for joining us for today's Full Throttle Talk. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk with you next week.
Great. Thanks, guys.